Are you making yourself feel bad for things that are actually super common and normal? My name is Christina Vero and I'm a registered psychotherapist, and just based on talking to hundreds and hundreds of people and couples and everything, I've got a pretty good sense of what we tend to demonize ourselves for, even though I think that they're actually very human things. So I hope that this video sheds some light on things that we actually all have in common and helps you go a little easier on yourself. So the first thing that I think a lot of people are hard on themselves for is being introverted or shy. There's a book called Quiet by a woman named Susan Cain, and she talks all about this and how our society really values extroverts, which causes you to feel like you are less than if you are an introvert. I am an introvert myself, and I gotta tell you that I speak with so many people who say things like, I see these people at parties where it just looks like it comes so naturally for them to be talking to other people, and I wish I were like that. And my comment there is that I think that there's strengths to both. I think that it's amazing to be able to go to a party and be able to talk to anybody new, even though, you've never met them before. But I also think that there's strength to being an introvert and actually not needing to have the loudest voice in the room all the time. Sometimes the energy of an introvert is a lot less intimidating, and you can have some deeper, more philosophical conversations with an introvert. You might have even a higher quality or more in-depth conversation with an introvert because they would rather put more attention on one person rather than just talking a little bit to everybody, and they might be less likely to make you feel overstimulated as well. I sometimes will be at a party, and if there's somebody who's really extroverted, as an introvert, sometimes it can be a bit much for me and I need a little bit of a break from that type of personality. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think that just appreciating that all of us bring something different to the table and it's all worth celebrating is really important to remember. As Susan Cain writes in her book, there is zero correlation between being the biggest talker and having the best ideas. And I also think that that's true. When you are introverted, you might not be talking the most, but I think that people who are introverted are a lot more selective about what they say. And so I've noticed that sometimes the people who are less likely to share ideas, when they do share ideas, I really listen because I know that they're just not sharing them to hear the sound of their own voice. So if you're a little bit introverted, just know that in the right setting, you actually have qualities that really shine, and that there are other people that probably really value those qualities in social settings too. There's nothing wrong with being introverted. There is nothing wrong with being shy. So let's celebrate that a bit more. I also think that something that we demonize a lot is being sensitive. And again, I think that in the context of Western society, what's often celebrated is being a little bit more competitive or having an edge or having ambition, all of these things. I actually think you can still be a sensitive person and have all of those traits of leadership and ambition and all of those things. But I notice that a lot of people I work with will get really frustrated with themselves when they get upset about things because they're a little bit more sensitive, rather than really thinking about the strengths that come with sensitivity. I am somebody who is extremely sensitive. I have definitely over the years had to learn how to thicken my skin. I used to be a journalist, and that really helped, and being a therapist has also really helped. But I will say that people who are sensitive tend to be very emotionally intelligent. They can read a room really well. So they're not just in tune with their own emotions, but they might be more in tune with other people around them. They're usually better at putting themselves in other people's shoes, and that can come with a degree of thoughtfulness and empathy that I think is very beautiful. And I actually had a therapist back in the day, long time ago, and I would talk to him about how I got so frustrated about being a sensitive person. And something that he said to me was that, yeah, but at least you see the depths of the world. And he was saying that, when you speak to people who are not very sensitive and they don't really think deeply about things, they kind of live on this surface level plane. And I thought that was kind of an interesting reframe of that, yeah, if you're sensitive, sometimes it's a challenge, but you also experience things more deeply, whether that is joy, whether that's sadness or whatever. But I also think that allows you to connect to people a lot better as well in some contexts. So if you're sensitive, know that you have a good community around you for sure, and there's nothing wrong with that either. In fact, I wish that we could all let our sensitivity and vulnerability shine a little bit more with one another, because I do think that when we're able to be vulnerable, it connects us. Something else I think is very human is needing validation. Of course, everything that I'm talking about in this video, there are extremes and it's a spectrum, but we are social creatures and we like to know that we're doing a good job. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. As a therapist, something I really struggle with is not really having these clear-cut tangible metrics for success. You know, like a physiotherapist might say, okay, your muscle is this much stronger. And there are things that we can measure in therapy, but obviously it's a little bit more abstract. And I've noticed that sometimes if somebody says, I actually really appreciated that tool that you showed me, or thank you for doing XYZ, I actually really value that because I just need some way of knowing if I'm doing a good job or not. A lot of people that I work with will say things like, oh, I don't know why I need so much validation. Like maybe that's a sign that I'm insecure. Now, obviously, if you have no way of giving yourself a pep talk and no way of evaluating yourself internally from your own perspective, that is an issue. But needing other people to say that you're doing a good job, needing your partner to say that they love you, needing people to say that they appreciate you, or hearing thank yous, that is very, very human and understandable. And I would say that that is a universal need. So don't beat yourself up too much for that. We all need that. Another thing that I actually think is very normal, and this goes back to this idea of us being social creatures, is comparison. We need to compare ourselves to others to some degree to know how we measure up. And I believe that on first glance, that will probably rub people the wrong way, but here's what I mean. When we were evolving as a species, we actually really needed things like shame and embarrassment and guilt, because otherwise it would have been pure anarchy all the time and we wouldn't have been able to do anything constructive together, right? So, you know, let's say way back in hunter-gatherer times, you ate all of the food that everybody collected. You need to feel bad about that in order for you to change your behavior. So you need to compare how you are doing to how other people are doing, or how other people are acting in order for you to figure out, is this appropriate? So I think we actually have a very internal and inherent drive to compare ourselves to other people. The problem now, of course, is that the opportunity for comparison is way too plentiful. So you can go on social media, TikTok, all this stuff, and it's just way too easy to do that. And that is why I will often say to people I work with, it's okay and it's very natural for you to compare yourself. However, if you're finding that it's getting so out of control because you have too many triggers for comparison, then we actually really need to focus on cutting that back. Personally, I don't spend very much time on social media for my personal use because I do find that it sends me down a rabbit hole that I don't like going down. And so I just say, you know what, I would rather stay true to myself and my own values and what's important to me. And the easiest way to do that is to not constantly have these catalysts for comparing myself to others. The point being, it's natural to do, and we also need to monitor what's going on in our environment and what the triggers are for that comparison so that we can rein it in if we need to. Another thing that I think a lot of people are hard on themselves for, that I really think we should have some acceptance around, or just some kindness around, is wanting to be in a romantic relationship. I've noticed that especially women, heterosexual women that I work with, honestly, a lot of them will make this comment of, I'm so embarrassed that I'm talking about wanting to be in a relationship. My theory is that a lot of us women have grown up in this time where it's all about being independent and having a career and all of these things, that we feel as though we're like going against feminism or something by wanting to be in a romantic relationship or wanting to be taken care of. And you are absolutely allowed to have both. And also, if you are a man, and regardless of your gender or sexuality, just wanting to be in an intimate, emotionally connected romantic relationship is another human need that I think all of us have. It's nice to have friendships, and that's great, but I also understand when people say, I just want a different form and a different level of intimacy with somebody else. I think that when you're in a long-term romantic relationship, you gain this degree of comfort with another human being and vulnerability and deep closeness that you might struggle to get in other relationships in your life. So it's super understandable if you're like, you know what, I want to be in a relationship. That doesn't make you needy. That doesn't make you insecure. That doesn't mean that you're not independent. It just means that, yeah, you like the company of another human being, and that's something that you value. There is nothing wrong with that. So I really don't feel like we need to be hard on people for that. Another thing that many of us struggle with, in my opinion, is anger in general and jealousy. A lot of us will feel really bad and have a lot of judgments towards ourselves for being angry. I spend a lot of time in session validating people's anger, and most of the time I think they're actually quite surprised about that. And simultaneously at the end of our session, they'll be like, wow, it actually felt really good to hear that my anger makes sense. So for example, I've worked with people who will be angry because, you know, their partner is maybe being disrespectful, and it's like, you know what, you actually should be angry about that. That is what anger is for. I always say that anger is the energy of a boundary showing up. And so if you're angry, it's because something inside you is saying something is not right here, and I need need to put my foot down. We need that emotion to have boundaries and limits in our lives. Otherwise, people would take advantage of us. We wouldn't be able to stay true to ourselves. We might get in unhealthy relationships or unhealthy environments or whatever. So anger is very, very important. So instead of saying, oh, I can't believe I'm feeling this way and I shouldn't be feeling angry, I like to ask, what is the wisdom of this emotion? What is the wisdom of this anger? Because you actually might be surprised by that answer. Okay, so this is one that is huge, but I really wish that it were more normal or accepted to not want a relationship with your family. Oh, I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with where the family dynamic that they're in is so bad for their mental health. There is abuse. Even if it's not really explicit abuse, there is gaslighting, guilt tripping, and I mean the real gaslighting. I'm not talking about the gaslighting that everybody throws around nowadays. I'm talking about just real emotional, psychological manipulation that just makes them feel horrible about themselves. Or every time they go to a family function, they just feel terrible. And maybe it's not because there is overt abuse or manipulation or anything like that, but it might just be that they don't fit in with their family. And so every time they leave, they feel like crap, they feel excluded, they feel othered, they feel less than, all of these things. And so many people I've noticed try to force a relationship with their family just because that is the narrative in Western culture of family is everything, blood is thicker than water, la, la, la. If you just feel like everything in your life gets worse when you hang out with your family, you do not need to be close with your family. Now, of course, I understand that breaking ties with your family is a whole other ballgame, and that has pros and cons for sure. And sometimes that's not always feasible for people, but it's okay to set some limits and find ways to create distance with your family members so that your life is more manageable and your quality of life is better. There's nothing wrong with that. So the biggest thing that I talk about with people in that situation is the concept of a chosen family. And that's a popular concept from the LGBTQ plus community who have sometimes been kicked out of their houses for being gay or trans or whatever. And they will choose people that they don't have a blood relationship with, but they feel like family. They create a safe space where they can be themselves. It's not just that they're tolerated, it's that they're really welcomed and loved and accepted. And so creating your own chosen family is a great option there. Another thing that many of us are overly critical about with ourselves is having a hard time changing behaviors. Do you know how hard it is to change a habit? It's freaking hard. It takes a lot of work. Habits are formed because you have neural networks that just are kind of going on autopilot. It's because you've done the same thing over and over and over that you don't even have to think about it. So when you go to change a habit, it takes a ton of mental energy. You literally are forming a new neural network in your brain. That is wild if you think about it. You have to interrupt a whole pattern. You have to try something different. It feels really unnatural. It takes way more energy. It's just a whole process. And yet people will be like, oh, I don't know why I'm not running every day, even though I've never run before. Like, what's wrong with me? It's hard to change behaviors. There are whole books about behavior change strategies in the world of psychology. Tips and techniques abound because it is such a complicated thing. If you were to go to Google and type in how to change habits or a book on habit change, there's going to be a lot of results because we need to learn these strategies because it doesn't come naturally to us. A great book that I really like is Atomic Habits if you want to check that one out. But my point is that it's hard and you don't need to make it harder for yourself by saying, why am I having such a hard time? Start small, make really teeny tiny specific goals so that you don't discourage yourself. And then once you beat that goal, you will gain a little bit more encouragement for yourself and you'll want to keep going. But again, just by saying to yourself, I don't know why this is so hard. Of course it's so hard. It's actually occurred to me that every single problem in therapy has to do with this theme. I want to change a behavior and I'm having a hard time changing the behavior. I literally wouldn't have a job if it were easy to change habits, right? We have psychologists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, all of these things because people need strategies on how to change their actions. So go easy on yourself. If you're having a hard time doing something differently, you are not alone. I can't tell you how many times in my own life I'm like, well, I don't know why I'm eating a whole bag of chips when yesterday I said I was going to eat a salad. It's hard, man. You just gotta be nice to yourself. The last thing that I want to talk about that is also something that I feel is very, very common and human that we actually demonize a lot is kind of having a false version of yourself. I actually talked about this in another video. This is a concept that comes from a psychoanalyst called David Winnicott from 1960, and he talked about how there's a false self and a true self. You might want to check out my other video for for the whole synopsis about it. But in a nutshell, he said that there's kind of two forms of a false self. On the one hand, there's the negative false self, I guess I'll call it, which is this version of you that is performing based on what you think other people want from you or based on society standards. And so, for example, you might always be accommodating because you feel like other people expect that of you, but it's really just a performance. And so you end up feeling extremely depleted and empty all the time. So that is like a negative, extreme version of a false self. But what Winnicott talked about was that you can also have a healthy false self. This is the part of you that's polite to other people, even though you don't really want to be polite. This is the part of you that makes small talk, even though you might hate small talk. This is the part of you that needs to function so that you can be a member of society, rather than just doing what you want all the time and not having any limits or boundaries. And so a lot of people say to me like, oh, I feel like sometimes I have to be, put on like a little bit of a show for people, or I have to do things I don't want to do, or I have to act in a certain way that I don't want to act when really I just wanted to do this. Yeah, that's part of being a human being. It's part of being in a society where we all need to function together. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now, again, there are extremes of all the things that I've talked about in this video. If there are no places where you feel like you can be your authentic, genuine self, that is a problem. But just feeling like you kind of have to be on sometimes, even though you don't want to, normal, it's common, we're all doing it. So my final thoughts, and I've said this a few times, is that all of the things that we're talking about exist on a spectrum of common and typical to, oh, okay, there might be a little bit of some other things going on. For example, if you're introverted, great. But if you're finding that every single time you go to a social gathering, you have such an enormous amount of anxiety, that might be more in the social anxiety spectrum. If you're somebody who needs validation, that's very, very common. But if you find that you have no sense of self that exists outside of the opinion of others, then that's something that you might want to explore with a therapist. So obviously this is all nuanced and complex, but I hope that the overall takeaway from this video is that some of the habits that you have or some of the needs that you have are not actually maybe as problematic as you think they are, and they're not as unusual as you might think they are. I think a lot of us have so much more in common than we realize, and so hopefully this gives you permission to just be a little bit more compassionate about yourself the next time that you have a thought about comparing yourself to others or a thought about having a really hard time changing a behavior. Let me know what you think about this video in the comments below, and thanks for watching.